Come to Genesis chapter 35 this evening, and we continue on from last week, and we saw the tragic incident recorded in chapter 34 concerning Dinah and the revenge that her brothers took upon the city of Shechem and the inhabitants of the city of Shechem. And after that incident there at Shechem, recorded in chapter 34, God then commanded Jacob to return to Bethel and to dwell there, to make an altar there to the God who had first appeared to him when he fled from Esau. So we begin here reading in chapter 35 and read the first 15 verses, which says, God said to Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there, and make there an altar to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, put away the foreign gods that are among you, and purify yourselves, and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, that I may make there an altar to the God who answered me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone. So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had, and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak which was near Shechem. And as they journeyed, a terror from God fell upon the cities that were round about them, so that they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. And Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him. And there he built an altar and called the place El Bethel, because there God had revealed himself to him when he fled from his brother. And Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried under an oak below Bethel, so the name of it was called Allon Habacuth. God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Paddan Aram and blessed him. God said to him, your name is Jacob. No longer shall your name be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name. So his name was called Israel. And God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall spring from you. The land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac I will give to you, and I will give the land to your descendants after you. Then God went up from him in the place where he had spoken with him, and Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken with him, a pillar of stone, and he poured out a drink offering on it and poured oil on it. So Jacob called the name of the place where God had spoken with him Bethel. So God instructs Jacob now to leave Shechem and to go to Bethel, where God had first appeared to him. And we can see on the map there, Bethel being located south of Shechem. So Jacob's journey then would have come full circle as he returned to the place where he had first met God and made the vow to make the Lord, or Yahweh, his God. But this was back in chapter 28. Verses 20 to 22. So in preparation for their journey to Bethel, which was about 30 miles south of Shechem, Jacob instructed his household and those who were with him to put away their foreign gods and to purify themselves and to change their garments. The journey is to be a sort of religious pilgrimage, and so it's important that the people should be consecrated for the journey so that God will approve of them, will find them acceptable. The presence of these foreign gods shows that there were some, at least in Jacob's household and in his company, who continued to possess the idols or these false gods and perhaps to worship them as well. Perhaps this included servants who had come from Paddan Aram with him. And you'll recall how Rachel had stolen her father's household gods back in chapter 31 when they had first left. Some of these household gods may have also been taken from the city of Shechem when they plundered that city. The people then were to undergo this ritual purification, which involved washing themselves and changing into clean garments. Something similar occurs when the Israelites come to Mount Sinai after they've come out of Egypt, as they're preparing to meet with God there at Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 19 and verse 10. Exodus 19 verse 10 says, "And the Lord said to Moses, Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments and be ready by the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people." So a similar situation occurring there as well, that they have to go through this ceremonial cleansing or ritual, symbolizing the removal of anything that was considered to be unclean or impure, things that would prevent a relationship with God. Jacob tells the people here of his intention to build an altar at Bethel to the God who, he says, answered me in the day of my distress and has been with me wherever I have gone. So he's expressing the trust that he has placed in God, and his awareness that God has been with him from that very first day. So the people gave Jacob their foreign gods and also their earrings. The earrings would also perhaps have some idolatrous significance as well. Jacob hid them under an oak tree near to Shechem. So this is at the start of their journey. As Jacob and his household made their journey south to Bethel, God provided them with protection, putting a terror upon the cities around them. So God instilled this into the local inhabitants, which prevented them then from pursuing Jacob and taking vengeance for the atrocity that Jacob's sons had committed at Shechem. Again, we can see something similar happening with the Israelites as they are led towards the promised land in Exodus chapter 23 and verse 27. God speaking of his angel who would go before them, and in verse 27 he says, "I will send my terror before you and will throw into confusion all the people against whom you shall come, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you, and I will send hornets before you which shall drive out Hivite, Canaanite and Hittite from before you." So again, a similar thing happening there when the Israelites are making their journey towards the promised land after coming out of Egypt. God sending this terror ahead of them to sort of clear the way, and something similar happening here with Jacob and his family as they make their way towards Bethel. So finally, Jacob and his company arrive at Bethel. We're given its original name here being Luz. That was mentioned also back in chapter 28 and verse 9. Its location, again, we're told it was in the land of Canaan, and there Jacob built an altar and he gave it the name El Bethel. El Bethel means God of Bethel, or the God of the house of God. Is a repetition of the word El, meaning God there. So God, the house of God. And again, it's emphasized that this is the place where God had revealed himself to Jacob when he fled from his brother Esau. Mention is now made of the death and the burial of Rebekah's nurse Deborah in verse 8, that she was buried under an oak tree below Bethel, and the place was named Allon Bacuth, and that means oak of weeping. So the name given here to this oak tree indicates the sorrow that must have been felt over the death of Deborah. The mention of Deborah's death here is quite interesting, in that she does not really appear as any sort of major character in any of the accounts, and the only other reference that we have to her is back in chapter 24 and verse 59, where she's not even named. She's accompanies Rebekah when Rebekah leaves her home to go off and to marry Isaac, and yet here she's burial, her death and burial is recorded. So she must have been well regarded, and she must have been a faithful servant. And whilst Deborah's death and burial is recorded, Rebekah's is not. So we don't know when Rebekah died, and the only reference to Rebekah's burial is to be found in chapter 49, verse 31, where she is included, her name is included in the list of all those buried in the cave of Machpelah. Whilst Jacob was at Bethel, God appeared to him again and blessed him. And God reaffirmed the change of name from Jacob to Israel, and reaffirmed again the promise made to Abraham and Isaac. Here, God introduces himself as God Almighty, or El Shaddai, the name that he had used when he was speaking to Abraham back in chapter 17 and verse 1. God now tells Jacob, or Israel, using his new name, to be fruitful and to multiply. And he says, a nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall spring from you. Again, this is a repetition of the promise that God had made originally to Abraham back in chapter 17 and verse 6. And again, likewise, the promise of possession of the land for Jacob's descendants is also reaffirmed. This is the promise that God first made to Abraham. He repeated it to Isaac, and now it's being passed along, repeated again to Jacob as well. God then went up, we're told, from Jacob in the place where he had spoken to him. So it would seem that this was not something that was happening in a vision or a dream, but rather through some sort of manifestation that God was making himself known to Jacob, and then God, in whatever form he was in, disappeared or went up from him. And Jacob then set up a stone pillar after God had spoken to him. He poured a drink offering on the pillar. And this is the first reference that we have in Scripture to a drink offering being made. And he poured oil upon it as well. And again confirmed the name of the place as Bethel. We'll read on here in verses 16 to 21. We have now the account of the birth of Benjamin and the death of Rachel. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and when they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel travailed, and she had hard labour. And when she was in her hard labour, the midwife said to her, "Fear not, for now you will have another son." And as her soul was departing, for she died, she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called his name Benjamin. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a pillar upon her grave. It is the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day. Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. So after that visit at Bethel and God appearing to Jacob again and reaffirming those promises, Jacob now leaves and journeys south towards Ephrath. Rachel, we learn here, is pregnant, and she went into a difficult labour before they reached Ephrath. So on the road, and she goes into labour. The midwife attending her comforted her by telling her not to be afraid, not to fear, for now you will have another son. And at the birth of her first son, Joseph, she had expressed her desire to have another son. This was in chapter 30 and verse 24, where she conceived and bore a son. She said, "God has taken away my reproach," and she called his name Joseph, saying, "May the Lord add to me another son." And that was the meaning of the name Joseph, to add. So she had wanted another son, and now the midwife reassures her that she's going to have another son. As she is about to die, though, we're told that her soul was departing, and that statement suggests to us that the soul leaves the body. It suggests the separate existence of the soul from the physical body. So her soul is leaving the body, and that sort of language is used in 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 21 and 22. This is the story of Elijah bringing the widow's dead son back to life. 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 21. The child has just died, and Elijah has gone to the home here where the child is. Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, O Lord my God, let this child's soul come into him again. And the Lord hearkened to the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came into him again, and he revived. So there's that separation there of the soul from the physical body, and Elijah prays, and the soul comes back into the body, and the body becomes alive. Also in Luke chapter 8, verse 55, in the story of the death of the daughter of Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue, Luke chapter 8, verse 55. When Jesus has gone to the home there, and he's told the mourners there that do not weep, she's not dead but sleeping, and they laugh at him because they knew she was dead. And Jesus goes in, takes the girl by the hand, saying, Child, arise. Verse 55 says, and her spirit returned, and she got up at once. There we see the word spirit being used, that her spirit returned. So the spirit returned to the body, and again she was alive. So this, in the case of Rachel here, we're told that her soul was departing, so she's at the point of death here. But just before she dies, she gives the child the name Benoni, meaning son of my sorrow, which reflects how she was feeling at that moment. But Jacob renamed the child Benjamin. Benjamin means son of the right hand, suggesting the closeness of that relationship, that Benjamin is close to Jacob, to his right hand, son of the right hand. That phrase is used in Psalm 80, verse 17 as well. Psalm 80 and verse 17. Again, it's suggesting the closeness of that relationship. Let thy hand be upon the man of thy right hand, the Son of Man, whom thou hast made strong for thyself. We use the term someone's right hand man, suggesting again that closeness, and that's the meaning of the name here, that Benjamin, of the name Benjamin, which Jacob gives to the child. So he changed the name from Benoni, son of sorrow, to son of the right hand. He didn't want Benjamin's name, the name of the child, to be associated with these sorrowful events that happened there. And Benjamin was Jacob's 12th and last son. He was the only one who was born in the land of Canaan. Rachel died then, and she was buried there on the way to Ephrath. Ephrath is Bethlehem. The name Bethlehem means house of bread. And Jacob set up a pillar on her grave, a marker there, which the writer notes was still there to this day. It's mentioned also in 1 Samuel chapter 10 and verse 2. Her tomb mentioned here. This is just before Saul is anointed as king, the first king over Israel. These are Samuel's words to Saul here after he's met with him. When you depart from me today, you will meet 2 men by Rachel's tomb in the territory of Benjamin at Zelzah, and they will say to you. So mention there that the tomb of Rachel there in the territory of Benjamin. So it must have been some landmark, well-known landmark that was there. And Jacob put that stone there, that pillar, much as today people put a stone or gravestone to mark someone's grave today. Rachel, of course, had been Jacob's favourite wife, the one he had first loved and worked hard for, to get her as his wife, and her death caused him great sorrow. We see this in Genesis chapter 48 and verse 7, where he's recalling these events. He says in chapter 48 verse 7, "For when I came from Paddan, Rachel to my sorrow died in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrath," that is Bethlehem. So it must have been a sorrowful time then for Jacob. The pillar there remained as a memorial then to Rachel's life, and a way in which people would be able to see that and would be able to remember her. Jacob, now referred to here as Israel, continued his journey, and we're told he pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. And again, we don't know anything about that. The name means Tower of the Flock. So it must have been some notable landmark there in the region. We then come to verse 22, which very briefly gives us a record of Reuben's sin. While Israel dwelt in that land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. So Reuben's sin is that of sleeping with Bilhah, Jacob's concubine, and she had been Rachel's maid. Israel heard of what Reuben had done, and although his response is not recorded here, Reuben was Jacob's firstborn son by Leah. And in sleeping with Bilhah, Reuben was asserting some sort of claim to leadership of the family. He is the firstborn, so it's as if he's sort of flexing his muscles as the firstborn. Something similar happens with Absalom, David's firstborn son, in 2 Samuel chapter 16, after Absalom has led this revolt against David. David has left the city of Jerusalem, and Absalom takes David's concubines and goes and sleeps with them. In 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 20, "Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, 'Give your counsel, what shall we do?' Ahithophel said to Absalom, 'Go into your father's concubines, whom he has left, to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you have made yourself odious to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened.' So they pitched a tent for Absalom upon the roof, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel." Again, that's done as a demonstration of his claim to kingship, that is in effect saying, "I'm the king now," by doing that. And Reuben is doing something similar here when he sleeps with Bilhah. Jacob's offense at Reuben's action, though, is revealed later in his final words to Reuben in chapter 49, verses 3 and 4, at the end of Jacob's life, when he's pronouncing these words of prophecy upon his sons. Chapter 49, verse 3, he says, "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my strength, preeminent in pride and preeminent in power. Unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. You went up to my couch." So Jacob withdraws the right of the firstborn from Reuben. He was the firstborn, the preeminent one, but Jacob says, "You shall not have preeminence because of what you have done." This is mentioned as well in 1 Chronicles chapter 5 and verse 1. Which is the family records, of Reuben, the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but because he polluted his father's couch, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, so that he is not enrolled in the genealogy according to the birthright. So he lost out on that because of what he had done there. Well, verses 22, the second half of verse 22 and down to verse 26 now gives us another full list of the sons of Jacob here. His family is complete. We're given a list of the names of his 12 sons. They're referred to by Stephen in Acts chapter 7 as the 12 patriarchs. And they're not recorded in order of their births, but according to their mothers. So we have, first of all, the names of the 6 sons of Leah being listed first, followed by Rachel's 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. And then we have the sons of Rachel's maid Bilhah being named, and finally the sons of Zilpah, who is Leah's maid. So this is the final list of the 12 sons there. And then we have the account here of the death of Isaac. So we're tying up a few loose ends here in this chapter, really. So verses 27 to 29 says, "And Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre or Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had sojourned. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years, and Isaac breathed his last, and he died and was gathered to his people, old and full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him." Jacob journeyed further south then from Bethel down to Mamre. You can see it circled on the map there, south of Bethel. Mamre has also had the name Kiriath Arba and also the name Hebron. And Jacob arrived there and came to his father Isaac. We don't know if this was their first meeting after Jacob had returned, but he's back there now after many years away from home. And we can only imagine what emotions must have been like the first time that he came home and saw his father after being away for more than 20 years. And this was the region in which Abraham and Isaac had both sojourned and lived in that region. How long Jacob was able to spend with his father before his death is not known. It may be that chronologically the death of Isaac is recorded here, that maybe happened sometime later on, but chronologically it's put here really to tidy things up a bit. Isaac, though, we're told here, was 180 years old and full of days. So he'd lived a long and a fulfilling life. And we're told that he breathed his last, or the authorized version uses that phrase, he gave up the ghost. And he died and was in that phrase which we've come across before of being gathered to his people suggests life after death, a reunion with his loved ones who had gone on before. Isaac's 2 sons, Esau and Jacob, came together in order to bury their father. And we learn from chapter 49, verse 31, that Isaac was buried in the cave there of Machpelah, along with and his mother Sarah and his wife Rebecca as well. So that's in chapter 49 and verse 31. These are the words of Jacob just before his own death. He's referring to Abraham's field that Abraham bought as a burying place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebecca, his wife. There I buried Leah. So Leah was buried there as well. So that's the family tomb. So Jacob himself will be buried as well. We come into chapter 36, and we won't read this. If you look there, you can just see it's a list of names which are difficult to pronounce. So we will try to summarize what's going on here. In chapter 36, we're given a record of the descendants of Esau. So again, we're tidying things up here in the book. We're coming to the end of the record of Esau, so the writer is just summarizing all of this here for us. So chapter 36 begins, "These are the descendants of Esau, that is Edom. Esau took his wives from the Canaanites, Ada, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, Aholibamah, the daughter of Anna, the son of Zibeon the Hivite, and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, the sister of Nebaioth. And Ada bore to Esau Eliphaz. Basemath bore Reuel, and Aholibamah bore Jeush, Jalem, and Korah. These are the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan." So the chapter begins here with the names of Esau's wives and their children. Esau's alternative name of Edom is mentioned there in verse 1. That name had been used earlier back in chapter 25 and verse 30, and we were told there that the word Edom means red. That was when he asked for that red lentil stew that Jacob had cooked. His Canaanite wives are named there as Ada and Aholibamah, and who they're daughters of these people mentioned there. Esau's marriage to these women, you may recall, had displeased Isaac and Rebekah. And knowing how these marriages had displeased his parents, Esau had then married Basemath, who was Ishmael's daughter. That's recorded back in chapter 28 and verse 9. We're given there the names of the children who were born there in the land of Canaan, 5 sons born to Esau in the land of Canaan. In chapter 36, verses 6 to 8, we have the record of Esau's move to Seir. Verses say this: "Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the members of his household, his cattle, all his beasts, and all his property, which he had acquired in the land of Canaan, and he went into a land away from his brother Jacob. For their possessions were too great for them to dwell together, and of their sojournings could not support them because of their cattle. So Esau dwelt in the hill country of Seir." Esau is Edom. So Esau's move from the land of Canaan to the hill country of Seir is recorded here. And the reason given for the move is that the land of Canaan could not support both Jacob and Esau and all of their flocks and herds. And again, Esau is identified as Edom. So from this, we can see that there must have been a period of time in which both Jacob and Esau were living in the land of Canaan together. But Esau then moves to Edom, and you can see the location of Edom there on that map. It's that sort of purple color down to the south there, a mountainous region that he moves to. Esau is again identified there as Edom, and some other references that we have which show that it was God who had given this territory to Esau for him to possess. So this is God's provision that God made for Esau. So in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 1 to 8. This is Moses recalling the journeys of the Israelites in the wilderness. "Then we turned and journeyed into the wilderness in the direction of the Red Sea, as the Lord told me, and for many days we went about Mount Seir. Then the Lord said to me, 'You have been going about this mountain country long enough. Turn northward and command the people. You are about to pass through the territory of your brethren, the sons of Esau, who live in Seir, and they will be afraid of you. So take good heed, do not contend with them, for I will not give you any of their land, no, not so much as for the sole of the foot to tread on, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. You shall purchase food from them for money that you may eat, and you shall also buy water of them for money that you may drink. For the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hands. He knows you're going through this great wilderness these 40 years. The Lord your God has been with you, and you have lacked nothing.' So we went away from our brethren, the sons of Esau, who live in Seir, away from the Arabah road from Elath and Ezion Geber." The mention is made there in God's words to Moses that God had given that land as a possession to Esau and his descendants, and therefore the Israelites were not to take any of that land for themselves. So they occupied land that God had given them before Israel got to occupy the land of Canaan. Then verse 9 to 19 gives us a list of Esau's descendants in Seir. They're introduced. These are the descendants of Esau, the father of the Edomites in the hill country of Seir. The names of Esau's sons by his three wives are repeated here, followed by the names of their sons, so Esau's grandsons. Verse 12 mentions one of his sons, Eliphaz, who had a concubine named Timnah, who gave birth to Amalek, from whom the Amalekites came. And in verses 15 to 19, Esau's grandsons are referred to as the chiefs. These are the sons of Esau, that is Edom, and these are their chiefs, so the leading figures in that community. And then in verses 20 to 30, we're given a list of the descendants of Seir, the Horite. And these were the inhabitants of the land of Seir before Esau and his family settled there. We have mention in Genesis chapter 14, verse 6, of their king. Genesis 14, verse 6 mentions the Horites in their Mount Seir as far as El Paran. This is when these kings come in and invade and take away Lot from Sodom there. But they mention there of the Horites who are in Mount Seir, Horites living in that area. Then in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 12, which says, the Horites also lived in Seir formerly, but the sons of Esau dispossessed them and destroyed them from before them and settled in their stead, as Israel did to the land of their possession, which the Lord gave to them. And then down in verse 22 of that chapter in Deuteronomy 2 as well, which says, as he did for the sons of Esau, this is referring to what the Lord has done, as he did for the sons of Esau who live in Seir, when he destroyed the Horites before them, and they dispossessed them and settled in their stead even to this day. So mention again there of these Horites who'd lived in that territory, but the descendants of Esau dispossessed them and took that land. There's mention of interest here. Verse 22 mentions one of Seir's sons named Lotan, and Lotan's sister, who is Timnah. And Timnah, we saw earlier, was the concubine of Eliphaz, named in verse 12. So there may have been some intermarriage going on between the different groups there as well. Verse 24 mentions someone named Anna, who, we're told, found the hot springs in the wilderness as he pastured the asses of Zibeon his father. So a note of interest there amongst all of the names that we found. So perhaps he was the first person to open up a health spa, having found those hot springs there. And the list concludes by saying these are the chiefs of the Horites according to their clans in the land of Seir. And then in verse 31 to 35, there's a note of kings of Edom. Verse 31 notes, these are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the Israelites. So the Edomites had a monarchy which predated Israel's monarchy. We're told of the king of the Edomites in Numbers chapter 20 and verse 14. Numbers 20 verse 14, so Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the adversity that has befallen us. And Moses is asking for permission to pass through their territory. So he sends that message to the king of Edom, but the Edomites don't want them to come through. Also there in First Chronicles chapter 1 and verse 43 makes mention of the king of the Edomites as well. First Chronicles 1:43 says, "These are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the Israelites." And then we have a list of the names similar to the one we have here in Genesis as well. So the names of the successive kings are then listed, and in some cases along with the names of the cities where they ruled from. And one note of interest there is found in verse 35, which tells us that one of the kings, Hadad, defeated Midian in the country of Moab. So amongst all of these names, occasionally you get these little mention of these little notes of interest that occur there. And then the final verses of chapter 36, 40 to 43, the list concludes with a summary of the names of the chiefs of Esau again, according to their families and their dwelling places. These are the chiefs of Edom, that is Esau, the father of Edom, according to their dwelling places in the land of their possession. So the inclusion here of the family records of Esau shows to us God's continuing care and interest in Esau's descendants. Even though later in their history, Edom and Israel became bitter enemies. Deuteronomy chapter 23 forbids the Israelites from abhorring an Edomite because they are brothers. The verse says, "You shall not abhor an Edomite, for he is your brother." But that didn't work out in practice, and there was often conflict between the Israelites and the Edomites. And so this then concludes the account of Esau's life and his family, and we have no further accounts, no mention of Esau again, no mention of the rest of his life, what he did, or no record of his death and burial either. So these two chapters that we've looked at this evening have really sort of been tying up some of the loose ends before we go into what's the final section of the book of Genesis, which is really the story of Joseph from chapter 37 onwards there. So we will stop here